Hiya, happy Sunday, back again. It's me, Anya, with Makeup and Metaphors, where we read books and we serve makeup looks. And today we're going to be talking about the very famous Lord Byron and all of his scandalous escapades that he had throughout his life. I hope that you'll stick with me, that you'll learn something. Maybe you need it for your GCSE, maybe you've done the poem She Walks in Beauty on the EduCast exam board, or maybe you just want to learn with me because I'm fantastic. All right, so sit tight, get yourself a snack and enjoy the show. Okie dokie, let's get into the scandalous life of Lord Byron. Maybe you've heard of him if studying the GCSE. For EduCast, I know that we're covering a poem called She Walks in Beauty. Beautiful poem, but with a bit of a dark context once you actually get into it. And if you've covered Lord Byron in uni as well, maybe you know a little bit more about his context, particularly maybe like his promiscuity and his traveling. So we're going to talk all about that today. Right, let's get started with our primer. So Byron is known to be one of the most famous poets in all of Britain. He was basically the original rock star when, you know, being a poet. He's had this motto that surrounded him, which was that he was mad, bad, and dangerous to know. He was kind of like the original celebrity, the original anti-hero. His reputation would precede him wherever he went, both for positive and for negative reasons. He was born on the 22nd of January in 1788, which would make him a Sagittarius, to his dad, who was known as Mad Captain Jack, and to his mum, Catherine. So with a dad with a nickname like that, you know, he had a lot to live up to. So I've primed my face. I'm just going in with a darker foundation now than what I usually do with my Nars, because I've been out in the sun and I'm very tan, but I'm just going to do a little light layer of darker foundation. So his dad, Mad Captain Jack, he had had quite a few kind of scandalous affairs throughout his life, and he had 3 children, one of whom was called Augusta. This is before he met Byron's mum. So he had these 3 kids, including Augusta, the daughter, but he needed somebody who had lots of money because he also had lots of debt. So he met Catherine, who was the heir to this large estate in Scotland, and he married her solely for the money to see if he could get him out of debt. And she actually ended up having to sell like the majority of her assets in order to help Jack pay off massive amounts of debt. And even they lived apart for a while because obviously if he married her for money, there probably wasn't really a deeper connection there. He still used to ask her for like loans to get him out of debt, out of these tight corners that he would get himself into. So Jack basically, Mad Captain Jack basically abandoned Byron when he was a boy. He went off and he left Byron with his mum, and his mum was famous for being a little bit unstable. In some articles that I read about this, she was straight up called schizophrenic. In other places she was just called a bit fiery, disagreeable, but it basically changed from every single article that I read. Byron and his mum were living in Aberdeenshire, and his dad had moved to France, and Catherine was still sending him money, still helping him out, but his dad then died in France of suspected tuberculosis. So it was just him and his mum, and that was it. His dad had abandoned him, and even after he had abandoned them, he was still asking for money. So I can tell that maybe this left a bad taste in his mouth in relation to maybe traditional relationships and ideas of marriage and love. And that might be a little insight into why he approached relationships in the manner that he did later on down the line. Byron became a lord at the age of 10, quite a title to have as a preteen. So he inherited the estate, I think, when his uncle died. It was called Newton Abbey in Nottinghamshire, and his mum leased it out for him to other people because obviously he was 10. I doubt he knew the ins and outs of being a landlord and a estate owner. He wasn't a very well disciplined little boy. Obviously his dad wasn't in the picture from a very young age, like first running away and then obviously dying. But there's been many children raised successfully and maybe even better with just one parent. But as I mentioned earlier, Byron's mum was fiery, maybe even had severe mental handicaps like disabilities, mental illness. Like I said, in some places she was described as schizophrenic, and they had a fiery, tumultuous relationship. They would really taunt each other and push each other's buttons and annoy each other, and he used to mock her for being short and like moody, cantankerous, whereas she would straight up call him a lame brat because he actually had a deformity in his right foot. So he was deformed and he was lame, so she would use that against him. I'm cream contouring now with this Revolution like liquid kind of concealer, just to change it up a bit. I'm always using the Anastasia cream contour just to show that this is a really easy method. Rather than having like a big palette like this, you can just buy a concealer in a darker color and use it as your contour for your cream contour. So he was educated in Aberdeen Grammar School for his early life, but he wasn't exactly a model student. He would have really violent outbursts, and when the school would try and sanction him, his mum would come and like mollycoddle him, and she'd take him out of school, which is exactly the opposite of what should happen. When a school punishes you and the school is in the right, the parents should back that up to reinforce that what has been done needs to be corrected. But if the school puts in place a punishment and then the parent actively counteracts that punishment, then it's a complete waste of time. So for instance, if a school gives a detention for not wearing the correct uniform, and then the parent says, well, you're not sitting that detention, that student has learned absolutely no lesson, only, well, I can get away with whatever I want. That is kind of what was happening with Byron. At one point, his kind of violent mood swings were so bad that the teachers actually said to him, like, have you considered like extreme exercise to get all of this anger out of your system? So maybe that was some of his mum's mental illness like manifesting in him. Maybe it was anger from his father having abandoned them. You know, also the fact that he was a lord, he probably felt like he was much better than the other boys that were at his school. The next step on Byron's education is Trinity College, Cambridge, and a lot of GCSE pupils are aware with some of the stories from his university days, in particular the story of the bear, which I'll get into now in a second, just once I cover the basics. So in university, obviously there would have been rules, just like in any university, and again, Byron would like actively flout these rules, or like, you know, cleverly try and go about them in a way that was technically not breaking the rules. It was in university that he really started to like experiment with his sexuality, like started to realize that maybe he was homosexual, maybe he was bisexual. And we need to remember that obviously being gay back then came with heavy punishments, heavy sanctions, such as public hanging. So it would have been terrifying to experience, I suppose, them sort of emotions at that time. So on to the story of the bear. Right, I've powdered my face. I'm so warm right now. This heat in the UK is really taking the mick. So I'm gonna set everything in place now that I've powdered a bit. Right, contouring. I've just got this little Kevyn Aucoin. Look how absolutely filthy that is. But it's great, it's this little tiny duo. So I'm just gonna create the shadow here at my cheekbones and go up. So Byron loved animals all his life, and he kept animals everywhere he was, all the different countries that he visited, all the kind of different roles that he played. In particular, he really loved dogs. And when he went to university, when he went to Trinity College, Cambridge, he was furious that it said in the rules, you know, no dogs. It's specified no dogs. So Byron decided to get a little bit creative with this rule. And instead of having a pet dog, he decided, well, let's have a pet bear. Because, you know, bears are definitely as domesticated as dogs. But no, he had this pet bear. It was tame. He had it on a chain. He'd walk it around the grounds, treat it like it was his dog. It stayed in his dorm room with him. And the college obviously wasn't happy about it. The uni wasn't happy about it, but couldn't contest it. Technically it wasn't a dog, and it didn't say anything about bears in the rule book. So Byron loved dogs so much. He actually had a Newfoundland dog, you know, beautiful, huge dogs, called Botswain. And the dog actually contracted rabies, but he kept it with him, he nursed it, he didn't care about his own health, didn't care about maybe contracting the disease himself. And when the dog passed away, he actually had it buried on his estate, and he had said that when he was to die, he wanted to be buried with his dog. And the dog has actually got a bigger tombstone than Byron has now, which again shows his love for the animal. For a highlighter, I'm going to use this Soph highlighter. It's awesome, really bright, and I've actually got a brand new one in the giveaway that I'll be doing once I reach 500 subscribers. I watched an excellent documentary, a 2-part documentary on YouTube while I was researching this, and it was super interesting. An English actor, Rupert Everett, I think is his name, was going through all of the different places that Byron visited, all of the different romances that he had throughout his life. There's no way that I could go into detail on all of them in like a 20-25 minute YouTube video, but if you're as into Byron as I am, I'll link the 2-part documentary series in the bio so that you can have a look at it. Byron lived in several states throughout Europe. He lived in like Italy, Greece, and everywhere that he went, he always had animals with him, and they always lived indoors with him except his horses. So again, we can tell that he was really an animal person. In 1811, despite the really tumultuous relationship between Byron and his mum, she passed away, and he fell into like this really deep depression, and I suppose he tried to fill the void that had left, kind of the only family member that he had. He tried to fill that void with kind of a series of affairs, and he was really famous for his affairs. And remember, he was bisexual or maybe even pansexual. I think he just was attracted to personalities rather than genders, you know. And he had a series of affairs, I suppose, to make up for the fact that now maybe his actual blood family were gone. So he started off, he had an affair, or he had a relationship with Lady Caroline Lamb, and then he had a relationship with Lady Oxford, and then I suppose the most shocking of all his relationships, at least in my eyes, is he had a relationship with his half-sister Augusta. So if you remember at the start, I spoke about his dad having kind of a series of affairs, and that he had a daughter named Augusta before he got with Byron's mum. And Byron believed this to be kind of the darkest desire that he had, that he fancied his half-sister. And again, maybe it was the idea of family and being connected. His mum was dead, his dad was dead, he was an only child. Perhaps it felt he felt some kind of deeper connection there. In fairness, I don't know why I'm trying to psychoanalyze his incestuous desires, but there we go, can't help it. Byron married Lady Isabella Milbank in 1815. Now, I didn't know this from the articles I read, but from the documentary, so I'm going to do one eye on camera, one eye off camera. But from the documentary, she actually rejected him the first time, and then he kind of pursued her more vigorously, I suppose would be a way of saying it. And she eventually said yes, and then he told her after the wedding, you know, you're going to regret the fact that you rejected me the first time. Lovely thing to say right after you get married to somebody. Okay, that was all just one colour. I'm going to go in with a deeper colour now. This is called Phone Home, if anyone has the Alien Palette. And what I found maybe even more shocking than his incestual relationship with his sister is that after he married Lady Isabella Milbank, they had a daughter together. And guess what he went and called her? Or what they went and called her? He called her Augusta. What? Like, talk about being like inconspicuous, or like trying to look like he didn't fancy his sister. He went and called the baby Augusta, which to me is just pure insanity. Why would you do that? Like, he obviously didn't want people to know of this affair, and then he goes and calls the baby after his half-sister. I don't know. Maybe he thought that it would look more like an homage to her than anything else, but to me it just looks crazy. Right, I think I'm gonna do a floating cut crease along there with concealer. I've never actually done this before, so this could be a complete disaster. But let's see, I think I'm gonna start there, go up, and then I kind of go out with a flick. Bring that up higher. Looks kind of like a floating cut crease. And then I'm just gonna blend it down a bit. This isn't much of a tutorial and more me experimenting. So, Lady Milbank suspected Byron of having other affairs, which he definitely did. He was like the world's most promiscuous person. And on top of that, she suspected him of incest as well. I found out in the documentary that I watched that he had actually been sharing a bed, as they put it, but he had been sleeping with his half-sister like in the year coming up to his wedding to Lady Milbank. So I'm wondering, did he just marry her as almost like a beard for his incest, to cover his incestual behaviour? Okay, to me that looks like a floating cut crease. I'm gonna tap that out and blend it slightly, and then let's put some glitter on it. This should be super pretty if I do it right. So in 1816, Byron left England, or I suppose he was basically exiled, because, you know, England was tolerant, but not tolerant enough for all the things that Byron was up to. Like, drinking on its own, fine. An affair on its own, okay. You know, but drinking, affairs and incest, and it was just too much for the United Kingdom. Just a little bit too much for them to handle. So he basically left, or was exiled, and he ended up in Switzerland with his very good friend Percy Bysshe. I always say Bysshe, but I think I've pronounced it wrong. Percy Bysshe Shelley and his wife. And I think they basically had the time of their lives over there, living in a house and writing and having parties and getting up to all sorts of scandalous things. And Shelley's sister-in-law or stepsister, I think it's his stepsister, was Claire Claremont, and Byron and herself ended up having a bit of a fling. And I know that Claire Claremont was quite infatuated with Byron. You need to remember, he was quite the celebrity. You know, he had been exiled. He was like the ideal romantic rock star, famous for, you know, bedding both men and women, writing beautiful poetry that was extremely famous. So she was kind of like, I suppose, what you call a groupie nowadays. And she ended up pregnant, and she gave birth to their daughter Allegra in 1817. I'm gonna finish the other eye and I'll be right back. Okie dokie, so what do we think? Both of them done. This is, like I said, this is my first time ever doing a floating cut crease, but I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, actually. Yas, yas, yas. So let me see what we're gonna do next. We're gonna do liner probably, and some mascara. So in the true kind of romantic sense, Byron wanted one last kind of big action before he died, and he accepted the invitation to fight to support the Greeks for their bid for independence against the Ottoman Empire. So you might think that's really random, but he had this idea about like how life should be, that we should all be free, and he almost saw himself as like leading Greece into the like new world, and that he could be like a catalyst for change. Okay, that's one eyeliner done. And he donated £4,000 of his own money towards like the naval fleet in order to help the fight as well. And he ended up like running his own unit in the army, like being in charge of a fighting unit. So some people think that he was maybe trying to make up for the fact that he was deformed, that he went for this like uber masculine position of joining the army and everything. Again, we'll never know, we can't ask him. You know, could be the same with his affairs. thought that maybe because he was deformed he wouldn't be able to have anyone, and then, you know, he ended up being this huge promiscuous character. So he fell ill. I believe he was like wading through a swamp and ended up getting a fever. So like, of all the things that could have killed him, I believe like it's quite famous that he contracted quite a few like STDs in his time, because he had slept around a lot. He had a lot of affairs and things like that in all different countries. So some historians fight that actually going to war was like a result of him losing his mind through having syphilis for years and years, along with maybe like the progression of his mental illness that could have been hereditary from his mum. But again, we'll never know. So the doctors bled him in like as a way to try and treat his illness, but this obviously weakened his immune system and then he died. So his official date of death is the 19th of April 1824, as I said before, at the age of 36. Now he did so much and travelled to so many places, and he did it all in quite a short period of time when you consider the fact that he died at such a young age. And I read that he was embalmed in brandy so that his body could be taken back to the UK. He was considered a hero in Greece, and he still is considered quite a hero for, I suppose, fighting and donating and really working towards their freedom from the Ottoman Empire. But he wasn't viewed quite as favourably in the UK, and when his body was brought back, the clergy actually refused to have him buried in Westminster Abbey. The last time I talked about it, I called it Westminster Abbey, which I have since learned is incorrect. And it's just Westminster. This is the new gloss, by the way, from Shane Dawson's collection, the gloss. It's really freaking nice. I don't think I'm going to bother with lashes today, you know, because it's just quite a lot on its own. So he was buried in his family vault then in Newstead, but in 1969, in like a memorial for Byron, his body was laid on the floor in Westminster Abbey. And that is it. That is the story of Byron, or at least everything that I wanted to talk about with Byron. What did you find most shocking about his life? Do you know any of his poems? Did you know any of this at all? Are you going to study him? Let me know. I would like to know. And I hope that you will watch that documentary that's down below, because it is really interesting. As I say myself, interesting. All right, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you liked the look. It's quite different, something that I tried, something new. Okay, and I will see you same time next week. Happy Sunday. Bye-bye.